Welcome to Men's Anonymous, the podcast where men can be vulnerable and open without fear of judgment. Your host, Daniel Weinberg, leads authentic and unfiltered discussions that explore the challenges and triumphs of modern manhood. Join us as we break down barriers, challenge stereotypes, and redefine masculinity. Men's Anonymous, a safe space for men to lower their shields and share their inner world without judgment.
Hi, on today's episode, we have Matt Brown, founder of She Is Not Your Rehab. This man has an incredible story to tell, and not only is it an incredible story, he's an incredible man, and a young man at that. I just wanted to give the guy a hug, to be honest. It was so heartwarming, and the man has such an incredible energy. I can't wait for you to listen to it. Love you to drop some comments in the podcast below, letting me know what you think. Men's Anonymous. Hey, Matt.
Hey, brother.
Very excited to have you on the show today. We're going to have a lot to dig into. So where are you right now?
I'm currently in Ōtautahi, Christchurch, New Zealand.
Christchurch, New Zealand. So welcome, New Zealand. So I really want to, for the audience, to set the tone of this conversation. I really think it's important that you tell us a little bit about your upbringing and the experiences you had that put you on the journey and path that you're on.
Yeah, cool as, bro. Well, I was born here in New Zealand, in Auckland, our big city, on the North Island of this country, of this beautiful country. But I was raised down here in the South Island in Christchurch, which most would consider the greatest rugby city in the world. But yeah, I suppose growing up for me was, if I could describe my childhood in one word, I would describe it as unsafe. You know, I mean, I love my childhood. I loved hanging out with my brothers and my siblings, but there was 5 of us boys all up, 4 brothers, and then I had 3 half sisters. I had 1 sister who passed away at birth. So 9 of us all up, but most of the time there was about 5 of us boys in our household. And so it was a very male, masculine, dominant household. So growing up for me, I would describe my childhood unsafe. By the age of 10, we had lived in every woman's refuge home here in Christchurch. My father was in and out of prison for domestic violence, family violence. In fact, he got out of prison after doing a long leg up in Auckland, and he was offered a job down here in Christchurch, which is why we shifted down here to the South Island of New Zealand. The company that offered him a job shifted our whole family down. And so my father took us away from, our home environment. South Auckland was where we were raised, which is the biggest population of Polynesians in the world. And moved down to Christchurch, where the city, there weren't many people that looked like us. There weren't many brown people, coloured people, Indigenous people. And so our superheroes growing up watching on TV, our superheroes that we would watch were on television were rugby players. Right. And so I grew up in an era where the greatest rugby player, I believe, the All Blacks, John Olomu, whom I will consider one of the greatest All Blacks, who made rugby internationally famous. Those were our superheroes, but unfortunately for me, I wasn't the best at sport. I gravitated towards more KFC and fried chicken, but I really love hip hop. I gravitated towards hip hop, and it wasn't just because these black and brown brothers and sisters were talking about pretty girls and fancy cars. It was actually them talking about their stories of pain and trauma where they grew up. And so this really resonated with me. I really connected to these stories. And so, watching my mum be subjected to violence on a daily basis was horrific. It became my normal. I remember waking up at 3:00 in the morning to my father pulling my mother down the hallway by her hair. The infamous movie, if you've ever seen an infamous movie. Once We're Warriors.
When you're talking, well, the way you're describing just the small detail, I mean, the first thing that really comes to mind is Once We're Warriors, which is a very intense movie. It's an incredible movie, but it really shines a light on what you're talking about, which is that that's a real thing.
Yes, real thing. And I was 10 years old when that film came out. We sat on the carpet on the floor in my lounge and we watched it with my siblings, and we laughed through the entire film. We thought it was a comedy because we would compare the mum's black eyes, Beth Heke, to my mum's black eyes. You know, Beth Heke's got nothing on my mum's black eyes, or mum's black eyes, because my mum will go to church like this, you know, bruised face with big black eyes, wearing her big sunglasses to hide her bruised face. Yet no one said or did anything. You know, people knew the violence, people heard the violence, people witnessed the violence, but no one ever spoke up.
Why do you think?
The shame, the stigma around family violence, people believing that it's not their issue, not their problem. But you can only imagine what that does to young boys growing up, witnessing your beloved mother be subjected to such violence, and watching your father, who is meant to be a superhero, just project all this anger and pain onto the woman he supposedly loves. And so, you know, growing up, I was confused of what a healthy masculine man looks like, because all I ever witnessed was violence, was abuse, was trauma. And so, I ended up telling my story. In school here in New Zealand, everyone's tasked to do a 3-minute speech in English, the subject English. I stood up in front of my peers to do my 3-minute speech, and I did my speech.
What age were you when you
15 years old. 15 years old in high school,
okay.
secondary school.
Yep.
And I talked about my story of family violence, growing up, watching family violence, being subjected to sexual abuse, being raped at a young age. And you could just see the horror by my peers, the shock by my teachers. And I remember feeling that day, anxious. What do people think? What are my boys thinking? And, the pushback was real. My boys came up to me after and said, bro, like, the shit you're talking about is, it's our story, but you're bringing shame to our culture. You're dishonoring your mother and father by talking about it. You're dishonoring our parents by talking about this stuff. That didn't really sit well with me, because I didn't have many options. You know, you think a 15-year-old boy to tell this story in his 3-minute speech at school.
The courage. I don't know how you did that. It's not like you're going to tell a therapist. You're telling your class, your peers. I mean, that's pulling it all out there. I mean, there's no other way to describe that.
And I think, when I look back, clearly this young boy, little Matt, was in survival mode. He was asking for help,
Screaming
for help, But though I didn't have any other option. Option one was to tell my story or speak up, or option two was to keep it suppressed and take my own life. Suicide ideology was a constant companion of mine growing up. Yeah. And so they really led me on this path of owning my entire story. The courage to own my story was hard. I left home at 15 that same year. I left home because the violence was just horrific.
But can I ask you, just to pause you there, was there a catalyst or something that gave you let's just call this out, the to be a 15-year-old child, because that's what you are, and to have the courage to you just lifted the kimono on everything there in front of some of these people aren't necessarily your close friends. They're your class peers. I want to know, would someone advise you, encourage you, recommend you? What was it that got you to muster up that courage?
It was a social worker in particular who I was seeing at the time. They didn't ask me to leave. It was just more, I was just having these conversations. I wasn't happy with my situation at home, suicide was a real thing. And when I say a real thing, I found myself sleeping on train tracks, hoping a train will come and free me while I was asleep. Because believe it or not, suicide can be hard. It can be difficult when you do attempt it, trying to complete that thinking. And so I reached out to our social worker, and all he did was really connect with me. He didn't preach to me. He didn't tell me what to do. He just sat and listened to me. But I knew at a young age that this life that I was living in was not what I wanted. I wanted different. And it was windows like hip hop. It was windows like the sports players, like the All Blacks, that really gave me hope. There has to be something more than this life that I'm living in, And so I just leaped and took the courage and left home. I moved into a boys' home where I found my feet and started, trying to find and heal. So from a very young age, and I started having these conversations with the boys that I was living with. I got into a trade job. I became a joiner by trade after school, and then I landed on barbering. I picked up some clippers. I mean, I was always cutting hair throughout high school. A haircut for $1 pie. I would, exchange with my boys at high school for lunch. I fell in the love of hip hop, of barbering through hip hop,
Yeah.
and it was through watching, my favorite rappers with their hairstyles, their fades. I mean, I really loved the fashion style of hip hop. And so I decided to pick up these clippers, went down to the warehouse, which is similar to Kmart, bought some Remington box clippers, which on the box it says titanium blades, but when these clippers touch Polynesian hair, they were blunt.
Yeah.
But I started with what I had. It went from cutting my boys in my neighborhood that I was living with to the boys in my neighborhood, and it just grew. And I knew then that as I was cutting
I read that you had a physical barbershop though, where all these men would come.
Yes, it grew. So I first started in a little barber tin shed, and then it grew into this big barbershops. And they grew thanks to my best friend at the time, Sarah, who is now my wife. We were good friends, and so she came on board and helped me grow this business, this barbershop. And it was when I was cutting men's hair, it started with men in the hood, in the neighborhood, to, men from all different walks of life. I started cutting men, construction workers, to policemen, to firefighters, to lawyers, to policemen, and still cutting the boys in the neighborhood who were selling, and dealing. And it was then I learnt as I was cutting these men's hair, and they would trust me with their haircuts, but they will soon start trusting me with their stories. And so vulnerability became a real thing. And I think it started when I was vulnerable with my story. The 15-year-old boy
I was about to say, I bet you that the way you spoke, you just gave them the opening, the invitation just to be vulnerable back, because you just went, this is me. I can see that.
When you're vulnerable, you give permission for other people to be vulnerable. And I soon learned that we were more alike than we are different, It didn't matter whether you were white or brown or rich or poor. Shame was shame, pain was pain. And unfortunately, it just did not discriminate, no matter what your background was,
So when I hear you talk, because you for what you've gone through, you're very calm, very gentle. You just got a very almost Zen-like energy happening. Like I can feel you just very centered. I really want to hear how you made that journey. How did you get there at such a young age, to like the way you're describing the opening of barbershops and talking to men? It sounds like for a very young man, there's some point along the path where you've had a mindset shift, and you've taken the trauma and the pain, and you've turned it into like a major opportunity to change your life. You know what I'm saying? Like you almost took it as like, well, this is my chance to reset in a very positive way. So it sounds like a very mature, well-experienced young man to be able to get there. So can you walk us through, how'd you get there?
I think it was just a thirst for truth, for liberation, for freedom. Because having these conversations with so many men, when I was sitting here, when I was cutting hair and just talking to the boys who were in gangs, who were selling drugs, who were in violent relationships, who just didn't know how to regulate their nervous system, and would then, transmit all this anger and pain onto those whom they so-called loved, their partners and their children, it just didn't make sense to me. And I looked at our system, I looked at what was available, the resources, and I just thought, no one's coming to rescue us. Like if we're waiting for our government to come up with the right program, the right tools to help the men in my community, we will be waiting forever. Like the system just wasn't working. The system was created for us to stay in this victim poverty mindset. And so then I just thought, I think just seeing that and looking at myself, trying to find answers and truth and freedom for my own self, I was like, man, I had to come up with these solutions that would work for me. And I didn't set out to try and rescue my neighborhood or help men. I really just wanted to help myself. And I think that has now turned.
But in learning how to help yourself, you've also gone into pay it forward mode. So what can you hone in a little bit on maybe some of those things that you learnt yourself in how to heal, like actually practical things that you put in place in your daily routine, or I don't know what you did, but like, can you get a little bit practical on us?
I started having hard conversations with my friends, with boys. My wife in particular, Sarah, when we were just friends, and she was probably the most challenging person that I had in my corner. And when I say challenging, a person who's seen beyond the facade, who's seen beyond the man who cut hair and was holding the space. She's seen beyond that. And I think when you've lived constantly in survival mode, for me, my go-to, my vice was lying. So I would just say little white lies, just to make myself look good or please, the person in front of me. Just I was a yes man, those things. And so Sarah had this canny ability
Call
to
it
just
out.
ask these questions. And I remember one time I was sitting on my computer doing some work, and we were just flatmates at the time. And she asked me very gently with the utmost compassion, why do you lie? I said, why do you lie to me? You don't have to lie to me. And I looked at her, what do you think I said? I covered it up with a lie. I was like, I don't lie, but she held her composure and said, I know you lie. And she started listing out things that I had said. And I was just like, it was like, oh my gosh, this person sees me.
Sees you, yeah.
And to me, when she asked that question with compassion, it was, instead of putting my walls up and being on the defense mode, it was my invitation to get real and honest with myself, And so it was things like that. And I knew, obviously, due to my childhood trauma, that I had so much baggage that I had to work on. And so, again, she would encourage me to go see a therapist. You need to get help. Like, me as your best friend, I can't be this person who's always here to listen to you. I'm happy to cheer you on and support you, but this is more than just a one person job, And so I did. I started to see a therapist. I started talking to different counselors about my childhood trauma because I just really needed this freedom. And I thought to myself, I'm someone who's emotionally aware. If I struggle with getting honest with myself, if I struggle with leaning into these hard conversations with myself, imagine how many other men who sit in my chair struggle with this stuff, And so I knew if I had to be this person who would hold space and lead the way for men, to show them and model what healing looks like, I had to do that myself. And so, I've found different practices that help myself, breathing techniques, so many different therapeutic ways that I've learned to regulate my nervous system.
So give us some examples. So breath work,
physiological sigh is something I use a lot.
What's that?
Which is you take in a deep breath, breathe in as much as you can, about 100%, hold your breath at the top, and then hold it for a few seconds, and then breathe in again for another about 10%, and then release. And so that looks like. So if I'm ever
how many times
I do that as many times as I can until I feel my nervous system come back regulated. So I'll often do that before I'm speaking, if I'm in doing any engagement or speaking or training with people. I'm a real introvert, so I do like my own space. I don't really like crowds. I get a bit anxious when I'm around many crowds, many people. So breathing techniques, box breathing is another thing I do. You inhale for 4 seconds, hold your breath for 4 seconds, exhale for 4 seconds, hold your breath for 4 seconds. This was a technique that was obviously popularized.
Do it.
So
and then again.
Inhale. So inhale for 4 seconds, hold 4 seconds, exhale 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds. So you do that again until you feel your nervous system regulate. So those are just, simple tools that I use.
Little tricks.
Yeah. Just, fast tools, conversation as well, talking. But then again, we can talk till the sun comes down, and people still don't regulate themselves. And so it's just, I've learned to have the right people in my corner who I can rely on and talk to and ask for advice. when I'm going through things. You know, I don't just rely on my wife. My wife is the best person, best listener that I have in my corner, but I have beautiful men who I can reach out to when I'm struggling. I
So
remember when
you got your own tribe that you've created. I love that. I mean, I'm all about that. So I want to know how would you describe your tribe? Who is your tribe? Like, who are the men that are in your corner?
my brothers, I'm very, very fond of my older brother. I have an older brother whom I've gone through the ringer with. We've had our ups and downs because we share the same trauma. You know, I remember when I first wrote our book, She Is Not Your Rehab, my family didn't want the book coming out. They thought it was a book of shame,
Exposure.
tell exposing them. But really, again, when I came to do this work, it wasn't about shaming. I knew firsthand in my own lived experience that shaming just did not work. Humiliating just did not work. If you want behavior change, if you want people to change, especially men, shaming them was not going to change. Yes, it may sting, it may hurt, it may, it may feel all those like
Emotions.
all those emotions, but it's not going to change behavior. When I wrote the book, I wanted to tell it I wanted people to read it from a lens of understanding where trauma was birthed from. And so my own father's story, the first person who perpetrated violence that I witnessed on my father and us, I wanted to understand why my father went down that path of chaos and creating this hectic childhood that we had. And in my discovery of that, I learned that he had lived through trauma, Yeah, and so it was just this intergenerational trauma that was passed down. The cycle just continued, and so writing the book, I wanted people to read
Like a
it to
learned behavior, basically.
learn behavior, and it's been beautiful. The men who have read the book, finally understand. For men
Why?
who don't engage in this conversation, they finally understand the correlation of their childhood trauma and their behavior. And writing the book, I wanted the book to go into every prison in New Zealand. When we worked with Penguin, our publisher, and my goal of that, I didn't want to write a book to monetize or capitalize on my trauma and pain. I really wanted it to be an accessible tool, because if you tell a man, bro, you need to go see a therapist, you need counseling, you're looking at $150 per session. For most of the men in my community, that's a whole week's worth of groceries. So my mental health or feeding my family, which one's more important? Obviously, feeding our families, keeping the lights on, but then our mental health takes a back seat. And so my whole goal in this work is to really create accessible solutions for men to take ownership of their childhood trauma and heal. Yes, your childhood trauma wasn't your fault, but your healing is absolutely your responsibility.
It sounds a lot easier when you say it, but like in practice, stopping, like after going through that, I can only imagine the resentment and anger, and it's not fair, and why me, and all that. So it's actually a big leap as that first step of just owning it and going, okay, it now is up to me. That's a pretty big task in itself. So you don't know how I found you, or even how did I stumble across you? So you've written the book, She's Not Your Rehab, and you've got the platform as well, which we'll get a little bit more into. But and I'm not a big social media guy, but I was, because of doing the podcast and everything, you have to get a little bit more knowledgeable about what's actually happening out there. And I was mucking around Instagram, and I saw this incredible post that you put out there, and I really encourage anyone who's listening to go and look at this reel. And what Matt did was, or Matt and his wife, they got 13 men got them to ring their best mate, or whoever was another male they're very close with, just to say, hi mate, I just wanted to tell you that I love you and you mean a lot to me. That's pretty much was the brief. And I watched this thing, and you put me to tears, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, it was and these men are like big, strong, masculine, they're men, and you see them, and when you hear the responses from their mate, who they called, I think it's would surprise a lot of people. And also what you learn from it, I mean, the responses, most of the men were some of them thought what's wrong? Why are you calling? Why are you calling me just to tell me you love me? Like, is there something up? Are you in trouble? Like that was either the response. But the majority of the responses, even after that, were all you could hear their response and you could hear it that in their voice how chuffed they were that their best mate called them just to tell them, mate, I'm thinking about you and just want to let you know I'm thinking about you and I love you, mate. Which is not a typical thing that men do to each other. Like I have mates who'll say, I love you, mate. I really love, thanks for being there for me. But just to get a call to say, hey mate, I was just thinking about you and I just want to let you know I love you. That's it. And I don't have much time to talk, but I just want you to know that I think was really hit a note. And it just shows you how, it doesn't matter whether you're a man or a woman, you have those same sort of needs, both to be able to express it, but also what most men, I think, struggle with is to receive it as well. Like it's sometimes very hard to hear, hey, man, I really love you. I think you're amazing. You're a bit like, too much. So I really implore everyone to go and get on Instagram, follow She's Not Your Rehab, and check out that reel because it's a ripper. Okay, so like kudos to you. It's beautiful. So you wrote the book and then it put you onto it really put you out there. You also did something really cool with your son where you did the Dear Mr. Rock to the Rock, the wrestler, but I've got his actual name, just know him as The Rock. Bit of a
Dwayne
oh yeah, that's right. And you got son, that's also really it's also a really beautiful clip. But talk me through how you then transition to, creating a whole platform around anti-violence and and getting men to talk and heal, etc. So like keep going with so you wrote the book, got out there
Yeah.
and
So, I mean, I've been doing this work for 2 decades now. I'm 38 years old. I've been working in men's spaces since I left school, really, in the barbershop. And it was really the barbershop became my hub of research, where I was talking to men every day, 20 to 25 men every day. I was cutting hair 6 days a week and just asking these hard conversations with men from all different walks of life. I would have men from all around the country, from Australia, just come to my city just for a haircut to have these conversations.
because they heard about you. Is that why?
Yes, they heard about me in this barbershop. I've traveled the world cutting hair and doing tutorials around in the hair industry. So I was quite well known in the hair industry for my barbering skills. But I was just passionate about these vulnerable, courageous conversations with men. And so we started running these group therapy sessions in the barbershop. Because I thought, again, who is helping my community? And so, I remember putting up a post on Facebook, we're running a group therapy session. I reached out to an organization here and I said, look, our men can't afford therapy. Can any of your counselors offer free therapy if I can get men in the room? And this organization, Aviva, said, look, we're struggling to get men in the room. We have women coming in who are asking for help. It was a family violence service. But we just can't engage men. So if you can get men in the room, we will happily give free counseling sessions. And so I put up a post on Facebook, and I remember a week before our session, my wife and I got to our barbershop to put the chairs out for our group therapy session. And to my shock, there was close to 100 men outside our barbershop, And so to me, that told me that men do want to have these hard conversations. It's just, where is it safe enough for men to come and load and talk about these things? And because I think the men in my community knew that I had been doing this for years, they found my barbershop safe. It was a place where they could come and just talk. And so doing it for a couple of years, I then got offered to do a TED Talk. It's called The Barbershop Where Men Go to Heal on YouTube. And when they approached me, I thought to myself, I'm just a barber. Like, well, what can I share? But I married a really strong woman who encouraged me to get my ass out there and tell my story. And so that was really the launch of She Is Not Your Rehab. I talked about it there, how men need to stop using our women as rehabilitation centers. Yes, they're our cheerleaders. Yes, they're our greatest supporters, but we need to take responsibility and ownership for our own healing. Because what we do not transform, we will ultimately transmit onto those whom we say we love the most, our women and our children. And so this talk obviously blew off. Penguin approached us. We wrote the book. I wanted it in every prison. We got it into every prison. Every person incarcerated in 2021 received the book for Christmas. So there's about 9,500 people incarcerated in New Zealand. You know, our country is a small country of 5 million people. And that just really just took off. They opened the door to so many opportunities. And I was working in the barbershop full time while I was going around speaking and talking about, you know, violence prevention, mental health. And then I just thought to myself, I can't do this. I can't juggle this up. My greatest passion in life is to be a dad. But my work was taking me away from what I love the most, which is my children. And so I had to make the hard decision to close our barbershop down, which we closed in 2 years ago, 2023, and just pursued this full time. And so what I do now is work with different agencies around the world, organizations, frontline police officers, social workers. Because again, I thought to myself, I need to work with those who are working with our communities, how to best engage with men in our communities. You know, like I can't work with all the men in the community, but I can work with those who are helping our communities. And so wifey and I, yeah, we've created a few programs and strategies and how to engage men properly in different communities.
So where have you done that around the world?
Heaps of countries. We were in the UK in the EU for about 6 months, 5 months last year. Many places. We've done India. I'm off to Thailand this week.
For example, you went to India. What was the?
We did it. Been there with the New Zealand Embassy. So we got invited there, and then we worked alongside different organizations who are fighting, you know, human trafficking, family violence, men's mental health, and these are, you know, places where it's very taboo to talk about, you know, vulnerability or family violence. In France, when I was in France last year, they were just gobsmacked that a man was sharing his story of being a victim of sexual abuse. You know, I stood there and owned my story as a young kid who remembers being groomed and touched by a family member, you know, but going on this path of forgiving, not to condone what happened to me, but releasing and forgiving so I don't, you know, transmit that anger and that bitterness to those whom I love the most, my children and my wife. This conversation was just new to a lot of people, a lot of countries that I've visited. But I see it as an honor. You know, we need to start having these conversations because in my experience, sitting and talking to men for the last 20 years, not having these conversations was destroying us. You know, not
Absolutely.
talking about these emotions and these feelings that we have been taught to suppress, to get over, swallow a concrete pill is not working for us. You know, if anything, it's working for the system. We're building more prisons, more women and children are dying at the hands of violent men and dysregulated men.
Okay, so men that you have engaged with in this type of process, have you seen the positive outcomes of? Tell us what you like, what you've experienced, because you've done many groups. Like, give me some examples of like. I'm trying to highlight for the audience to hear, because we talk about it, how good it is, but it's always really nice to hear, you know, stories of how good it really is in practice. You know what I mean? Given that you've spoken to lots of different men, can you recount any stories top of mind where you're like this gentleman, you know, went from this situation to where he is today because he, you know, was doing the healing that, you know, that he did?
Yeah, I mean, one story that comes to my mind straight away is a young man named Liam who came into my barbershop. And yeah, we got talking, and first I started sharing with him, you know, my journey. It was his first time for a haircut into my space, and he was just very like quiet, quite shut off. And then I started asking him questions, you know, what was your upbringing like? And he talked about his, you know, father who was addicted to alcohol. Alcohol was around his whole childhood, and then I started sharing my story of my father being an alcoholic. And then he looked up at me and said, well, I'm here because I've been struggling with my mental health. I'm actually here, this haircut, I had planned for this haircut to be my last haircut. And I'm like, what do you mean your last haircut? And he said, this haircut's the haircut for my funeral. And when he said that, so much emotion just came over me and I just started crying. I apologize. I'm so sorry that you feel this way. He started crying and all I could do was I just grabbed him and hugged him while he was sitting in my chair. And I remember him walking out of my shop, turned around and looked at me and he said, thank you so much for seeing me tonight. And I knew he wasn't talking about seeing him and fitting him in for a haircut. It was really seeing him beyond, the man who came in quite shut
Seeing
down,
him.
seeing him, seeing his pain. And that was over a decade ago. I sat with Liam. He's now living in Australia. His two beautiful children, married to the love of his life, and he's a PT, owns a gym over there in Australia in Melbourne. But he will message me when he sees my work online. Your work. He gives out my book to anyone he can in the gym. But he's having these conversations. He's now running group therapy sessions in his gym, holding space for other men. And so you're just seeing that trickle effect. I'm seeing a shift in culture of men. You can be a man who goes to work, who works hard and trains, and a masculine man whom society has painted us we should be. But then you can also be tender, vulnerable, emotionally aware. Emotional intelligence is just as important, and it should be just as important, if anything more important, living in the climate that we live in today.
So if I was to compare today where you see let's call it in New Zealand, the society, how different would it be to what it was like, what I saw on the screen in Once Were Warriors? Has there been a big shift in general, or does it still exist does it still permeate in this, in the culture?
Violence is still present. In Australia, just this last week, a Kiwi lady was tragically lit on fire while she was asleep by her Kiwi partner. They were both living in, her ex-partner, they were both living in Brisbane. Violence is still happening. Australia, last year alone, we lost 101 women to family violence, to a partner or person that they knew. So violence is, if anything, domestic violence is a massive, a global issue. So I wouldn't say we're getting better there, but I would say we are getting better in having these hard conversations. More things are now coming to light. People are more braver to have these conversations and talk about this. People are calling it out. I feel men are calling this behavior out more. And we need more men in the space calling this bad behavior out, because for too long, we've shut down and we've just been bystanders who don't say anything. Like I grew up, my neighbors never rang the police. They seen the violence, they heard the violence, but no one ever spoke up. People see my mum with black eyes at church, but no one ever came up to us and asked us, what is happening? No one came and looked after us children. So we had to fend for ourselves and navigate this life, as young children. And so we took it upon us. Myself, I came off the belief system. It was my job to look after mum. It was my job to protect mum from dad. But that's no children's responsibility.
Absolutely. Now, you've also created an app. It's called the Inner Boy app. Is that correct?
Yes. And so again, we live in an online space now. Here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, 94% of our country are online. About half of that are online all the time. And so I thought this is where we need to be. If we're to help people heal and take responsibility and ownership of their healing, we need to be in a space where people are. And so we decided to create Inner Boy, an online platform app. Again, making it accessible for people. Is free. Our government funded the first stage of it. We wanted it to be free for people, and so they can access that. It's a 30 minutes for 30-day program online. We just jump on there and do it. We wanted it to be easy and accessible for men. Our first evaluation research has come out for the first year, and it's been amazing. It's been beautiful.
Explain what if you do the course, what's a man going to get out of it? Explain to me what are the learnings you're gonna get out of, or the practices, or the habits.
These different tools in there, just diving into you know, things like anger, how to utilize anger for good instead of the detrimental to your family, yourself. How to regulate your emotions, you know, how to when situations do arise of conflict, the best approach to it, you know, maybe it's walking away, maybe having a conversation with your partner when things get heated. Can we put this on the shelf and come back to this? I will, you know, we will come back to this. It's not me just ignoring it and then shutting it down and not talking about it and going to sleep angry. You know, let's just pack this up. I need to go and process what's happening. Just things like that, just tools that we wanted to teach. And these are tools that work for me, you know, sitting in therapy for, you know, 2 decades now. We've worked
You
close
still
with
do
therapy.
therapy? You still in
Yes,
therapy?
still do therapy. And I'm a believer, don't go see a therapist when shit hits
Things
the
are
fan.
wrong.
When
Yeah.
life is hard, you know, you want to go and have these conversations with a therapist or friends, so you have more tools in your bag, in your toolkit, because when shit does hit the fan, you can then pull them out. You know, I have the right tools available at my disposal. So yeah, 30 minutes for 30 days. My daughter, oldest girl, Oceana, who was 22, who's a fine arts student here at the University of Canterbury, she's done all the artwork. So there's activities in there for men to watch and just sit with themselves and see what the image brings out of them. There's an image of one image that really stays close to my heart is an image of a father with his son on his lap and he's about to smack him. And if you look at the image closely, the father has scars on the back of his back, hand scars, you know, and so you just see that kind of explains intergenerational trauma. So the cycle just carries on. That day is called Cycle Breaker. So we're teaching men how to break cycles. You know, you can be the cycle breaker. Again, it's putting the ownership on us as men, and it is hard, like you said before. You know, that is quite a scary thing to take ownership and take responsibility, but who's going to come and do the job for us? It's not our partner's job. It's not our children's job. It's not the government's job. We need to take responsibility for our own healing.
Before we finish off, I'm going to ask you a series of questions I ask all my guests. So they're like quick response questions. I really want to hear how you answer these. Okay. So the first one is, who would you like to say sorry to given the chance?
The first person that comes to my mind is my mother, my dear mum, who passed away a couple of years ago. She lost her battle to cancer. I would say sorry just to for many things, for I feel not protecting her enough, not believing her enough. And that's a question that my wife, my dear wife Sarah, would always challenge me on. You know, you guys are so abrupt and short with your mum, but when it comes to your father, you guys are gentle, you guys are quiet. And I think when I look back at that, it was probably because we were scared of our father. You know, our father ruled the household with an iron fist, and my mother was the safe space. Well, that was our safe place. We could talk about anything to my mum, and so she unfortunately became the punching bag, not just for my father physically, but for all of us. We would just leash out, you know, you didn't protect us, mum. And so I would say sorry to my mum for not believing her, you know, and laying all our worries and troubles on her. But then I also had the understanding we were just children, you know, we were just traumatized children. But I would apologize to my mum.
What are you proud of being or doing in your life?
I am proud of breaking the cycle.
Nice.
I'm proud that I walk through the door after work and my children run up to me fighting over who's going to get the first hug. You know, because I don't ever recall feeling that way towards my dad.
Have you ever made amends with your dad?
Yeah, 100%. Well, I mean, part of this job, I knew when you're working with men, you had to be real about this work. You know, or else you're going to be called out, you're going to be challenged, you know, because when you work with men know when you're a fake, men know when you're real and when you're not, you know. And so I knew to do this work, I had to go down that path of talking, having these hard conversations with my father. And in that journey of learning, you know, my father is a very traumatized individual. And so I've forgiven him, not for his sake, but for my sake. Like I said earlier, if I hold on to that anger and that bitterness, it will just be passed down to my children. So it doesn't condone the violence or what happened to us, but
You're breaking the
released
cycle.
me to be the best father that I can be.
When did you receive kindness whilst needing it most and expecting it least?
My wife, my wife. Straight away, the first thing is how she approached me with challenging me on my lies. You know, why do you lie? And to me, I found that very kind. It wasn't she was attacking me, but it was an invitation. She invited me to be better.
It's cool. What did your mother or father teach you that you frequently remind yourself of?
Hard work. That no one was going to come and rescue us. No one was going to come and change my narrative. It was all on me. But hard work. I watched my parents slave away as immigrants who came to New Zealand from the islands, from Samoa, and worked hard my entire childhood. And so that's something that my parents, I will forever be grateful of working hard.
And the final one, which I'm very, very intrigued, which is, what is your superpower? Because it sounds like you have quite a lot of superpowers. So give me what you think your superpower is.
I think being vulnerable, it's and people. One friend once upon a time challenged me. Oh, Matt, you're used to being vulnerable. I'm like, no. Vulnerability is not the. I don't think you can ever get used to being vulnerable. Vulnerable. I think you learn that you make friends that vulnerability is uncomfortable. You make friends that vulnerability is gonna be, anxiety, your sweaty palms and your stomach's rolling. But I think, and that's been my superpower because it's been this doorway for other men to step through and be vulnerable themselves. When they see another man, a masculine man who's lived through trauma, who's come out the other end and is now compassionate and loving to his wife, has a healthy relationship with his wife, has children who, love him and adore him, want to be in his life. I think that's been my greatest superpower is owning my story in its entirety and being vulnerable with that, And when I say vulnerable, like me sharing my story of abuse, sexual abuse, I'm up for the audience to critique me and say harsh things, but that's part of that comes with the territory of being vulnerable. You're opening yourself up to being critiqued and criticized.
So I'm not going to critique. I'm going to say thank you. You certainly warmed my heart, and it's actually just really, it's hard to explain, but it's a really beautiful energy and very calming talking to you, and just listening to you. So I want to thank you for coming on the show, but I really want to thank you for doing the work that you're doing, because it's incredibly important and it's having a huge impact, much needed, but also that you're really having a big impact. So congratulations, and I'm going to keep following you and your journey, and I wish you, the whole platform, just lots of fortune in the future, and hopefully we stay in touch. So really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me, bro. I really appreciate it. It was lovely to talk to you. Thank you for listening to me waffle on.
Yeah. All right. We'll talk soon. Thanks, mate.
That's it for this episode of Men's Anonymous. Thank you for listening. For more information on the Men's Anonymous podcast, including resources discussed in the show, visit mensanonymous.com. Join us next time as host Daniel Weinberg provides a non-judgmental space for men to voice their innermost feelings and thoughts.